This is Peter,
And this is Tom.
and you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcasts. All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. All right, Tommy, number 61.
61. Wow, there you go. We're not going to have an asterisk next to this one, are we?
No.
You don't know you don't know what that refers to, do you?
No idea.
That would be a podcast. Well, no.
Why?
For
What
those
does that
who
mean?
listen,
What?
The 61 with an asterisk next to it. You don't know what that means?
Nope. What is it?
That would be when that was put in place when this is like a sport called baseball, Peter. And when Roger Maris broke Babe Ruth's record when he hit 60-run home runs in 1961, they put it was ordered an asterisk had to be put by his number because he had more games than Babe Ruth had. They reached that number. So they said they did hit 61 home runs, but it was a different record. Until, it was this whole big thing. They made a movie. They made like HBO movies about it. People heckled Maris. And then because Barry Bonds and Mark McGuire, Barry Bonds break the record years later, but there's kind of unofficial asterisks next to those because of all the steroids and stuff like that. But that's a whole other podcast. Steroids in baseball.
All right.
Podcast.
I was not expecting that. I was just like, hey, 61, we made it.
That just popped into my head. Sorry. Hey, we're just talking, right?
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
When baseball, they don't use their feet. So I know you're not aware of that one.
Yeah.
It's okay.
All right, Tommy, what are we talking about today, boss?
Today, for our 61 episode, we're going to be looking at what's our title, right? The American Vesuvius, okay? We're looking at the Mount St. Helen eruption on May 18th, 1980, and the aftermath, what led up to it in the aftermath, and some side stories that also took place during this event.
And just doing this research, first of all, I mean, volcanoes are kind of cool. Especially when you were little, I feel like volcanoes are kind of cool.
Well, you always make those baking soda volcanoes and stuff like that,
Right. They sell kits now. Like, it's all...
Yeah.
It's pre-done now.
Yeah.
But did you know that the United States is actually one of the most volcanic countries in the world?
Yes, I think people don't realize that. And I think that's something like, it's not obviously Hawaii, yes, but even without just Hawaii, there's a bunch of volcanoes all over. A lot of them are underground.
Yep. It actually, according to National Geographic, right, the United States boasts more than 10% of the entire planet's active or potentially active volcanoes. Like, that's kind of a lot if you think about it.
Yeah.
Another thing that I found out I thought was kind of interesting, technically, so we're going to talk about Mount St. Helens, right? Helens?
Yes.
But that's part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is actually a chain of 160 active volcanoes around the Pacific Rim, right? So this was your idea, by the way. You've been like stretching me here with this science thing. Like my
I wasn't really solid. I mean, I'll be honest how it came. I was filming the last one in my son's room because it was during the day when we recorded it, and I just looked on his wall, and he had has like the alphabet like with like stickers on his wall, and right next, and there was the V, and it showed volcano. I was like, hey, how about Mount St. Helens? That'd be an interesting podcast.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, I've been reading about tectonic plate slips.
We can talk about that. We can talk about that somewhat, but we're going to also. There's a lot of stuff that goes in there. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this event.
All right, so we're going to talk about the eruption, 1980 eruption at Mount St. Helens, and we'll talk about kind of what it did and what it resulted in, and you said some fun stories that. Well, I mean, as much fun as we can. I think we should start with a little bit of history because, that's what we do, of Mount St. Helens. There's actually a really cool story. I'm sure you saw this about the Bridge of the Gods that's kind of told by the indigenous people.
I know there was something I saw a lot of Native American ones. They used to be a major Native, but they abandoned it. Like, obviously.
They did because it kept on
erupting. Yeah.
Erupting.
It's a very active volcano. It's a very active volcano.
We should say it is also in Washington State. A lot of people, it's in Washington State.
Yes, Washington State. Yes, got it. Okay, talk about that Bridge of the Gods thing. Go ahead.
Yep. So essentially what happens is this story goes, again, this is indigenous people, Native American lore. And the one major story is that there was a chief of all gods, and this chief had two sons. And these two sons traveled down the Columbia River from like the far north, right, in search of like this area where they could settle. And they came upon the area today, which is essentially Washington State. And these sons first kind of fought over the land, who gets which piece of the land. So to solve the dispute, the chief of all gods, the father, shot 2 arrows from his mighty bow. And one went to the north, one went to the south. And where these arrows landed, that's kind of where the two sons settled. Well, what ultimately happens is these two sons fall in love with this beautiful maiden, and she could not choose between them. So they start fighting over her, which causes apparently this like cataclysmic, fires and burning of villages and forests in the process. And then um, what essentially happens here is, as punishment, the chief of gods struck each down, like each of the lovers, right, and transformed it into gray mountains as they fell. So he basically created Mount Hood, which is the one sun, and then Mount Adams was the other sun, and in between them is Mount St. Helens, which is the one that we're going to talk about today. Kind of stems from a Native American name that meant smoking or fire mountain. And so these are these like lovers, that these three mountain peaks. That's kind of the lore of this area. But today we're only going to concentrate on the middle one. And by the way, if you watch videos of this, like, this is intense. This has happened obviously before we were alive, even though it's only 1980. But like, this was like a big deal when
Well, because to
volcano
get to it,
erupted.
basically, the reason why there was so much, it was a huge deal, and also they knew it was coming at some point. Like they couldn't put the exact date, obviously, but they knew something was happening because one, it was a pretty active volcano anyway. I think it was last 500 years. It had major eruptions already. That and they were, when I say they, these volcanologists, I believe they're called, right?
Yep.
They were already kind of they knew something was brewing underneath Washington State, what's called in the stratovolcano. Again, not going to get into all these terms because it's just too much. But in less than during the period of less than 2 months, they saw that there's basically this giant bulge the size of a town appearing underneath the surface on the northern flank, and it just kept on like filling with magma and more magma, and that's how they knew something was definitely was on its way. And I think
Yep.
there were a lot of scientists there. They tried getting people around, and what this event really did show was it really made people in the United States realize that yes, there's volcanoes in Alaska and Hawaii, but there's also, like we said before, a whole bunch just in the lower continental United States, and it's something that the people have to be aware of, and that the country needed to have some sort of like plan put together to be able to
Yep.
deal with it.
I mean, based on what I read, they said that if they used what they had learned about reading volcanoes during this 1980 eruption, if they since then what they have learned, if they knew that back then, they would have been able to really pinpoint it so much better.
Yeah.
So this was almost like the catalyst
Well, there
for
was like
learning.
crazy things happening too. Like even in March of 1980, there was like these earthquakes all the time, and these like craters are just open up all over the place. So think about that. Like these like pretty decent earthquakes, like 4.0, 4.2 earthquakes all throughout this area by Mount St. Helens and the surrounding areas. And just these like fresh craters are just like opening up all in the ground and stuff like that. So like it's unstable. They know that an eruption is, these are all precursors for an eruption. And yet, so they are carting it off, but there's people that refuse to leave. And then more and more scientists and photographers are coming because they want to, get glimpses of it and examine it of what's going on.
Crazy. And the
I don't know,
reason
I don't
why
know if
we're
I would
even
do
doing
that.
this,
I don't know if I would go to a
yeah,
volcano if I knew it was going to erupt.
yeah, no, probably not. And a lot of people will talk about it today that we're around the area. We're like, yeah, I'm not leaving. I don't believe this. I'm staying. It's like,
Yeah, we'll
not a
talk
good
about
idea.
one guy in
Yeah,
particular, which we'll get
yeah.
to, becomes a kind of
Um,
like a
but
folk
I think
hero.
the reason why we're even discussing this on this podcast is that this is the deadliest and most economically destructive volcanic event in all of United States history,
Yeah,
by far.
yeah,
Right?
by far. So 57 people were killed in
Yeah.
this, and it cost in 1980 over $1 billion worth of damage, which would be around 3.5 billion today, just to give people like an idea. And we'll talk about some of the other things that it takes, but like, yeah, it just if you look at a picture before Mount St. Helens blew up and after, like the landscape is different, like the mountain's different.
Yep. Yep. All
Yeah,
right.
it's just
So let's.
it's a crazy thing. Yeah,
They say that it is definitely the most active volcano in that Cascade Range. When you look at
yeah, all the
Mount
mountain. Yeah, yeah,
Rainier,
it
like
has
you
been
look
the
at all the
most.
mountains. Yep. So, all right. So let's talk about it. It was said the 1980s cataclysmic, really, explosion of Mount St. Helens was the volcano's first major eruption in more than 100 years, right? We know for a fact that there was eruptions in 1800s, mid 1800s. I think the last one was like 1857. And after that, it kind of becomes dormant. Prior to that, based on archaeological studies, but also geological studies and volcanic studies, we know that Native Americans settled the area. However, they moved out due to the active volcano. Um, Supposedly, the St. Helens major eruption was like 4 times the size of what happened in 1980. But it is still, to this day, the 1981 is the most powerful volcanic eruption in U.S. history. So you kind of started getting into it, right? Like how this whole thing starts is a couple little earthquakes, and people are like, "What's going on?" Well, I say couple. I'm pretty sure that in March it was like thousands of little
These little
earthquakes, right?
earthquakes pop around. Yeah. Well, one of the guys we'll talk about, we'll get to him. His name was Harry R. Truman, not Harry S. Truman, Harry R. Truman.
Yeah.
He actually lived about a mile away from the mountain. And he used to go to sleep at night wearing spurs to keep himself from falling out of bed because all the earthquakes that happen like pretty much daily, constantly.
Yeah.
That would be like
Yeah,
knocking him
Ultra
all over the
March,
place.
1980. Yep.
Yeah.
Like
And
4.2 on a Richter scale.
yeah, which is these are decent earthquakes. Like they're going to be moving,
Yeah.
moving around. And scientists actually come and they set up this base called Cold Water 2. You're going to see that if you ever research it, you're going to see a whole bunch of these things called Cold Water 2. And that's where they're basically observing the volcano, and they're going to the mountain that becomes a volcano, and they're watching it, and they're just that's where they're radioing things that they see, and then it's really starting to actually quiet down a little bit in early May, and then it starts really picking up right before it happens, basically.
May 18th, right? So it's early morning, Sunday, May 18th, 1980. And actually, from a nearby observation post, David Johnston, I think, was one of the volcano experts.
He was
And
a
he said
geography survey guy, yeah.
yeah, and he's like, there was no red flags. He didn't predict any catastrophes that were going to happen. He's like, it seems okay. And then at 8:32 that morning, Pacific Daylight Time, by the way, a magnitude of 5.1 earthquake strikes 1 mile under Mount St. Helens, and that
Yeah, well, there was
triggers the largest
that triggered it,
debris
yeah.
landslide
Well,
in
right
in
before
history.
that, they noticed that there was like this bulge on top of the mountain,
Yeah, you
and that
mentioned that, right?
it was actually over a mile across now. So they're like,
Wow.
all right, something's happening. Like it's pushing up from the surface. And then at 8:32 a.m., you have that magnitude, 5.1 magnitude earthquake, shook the volcano. At that very moment, some of the people that were there, they were actually flying overhead in an airplane. It's a husband and wife team. Keith and Doherty Stoffel were flying over it, and then they actually saw the north face of Mount St. Helens transform into this like rippling, pulsating, churning, and then it just exploded. And a massive volcanic cloud. There's actually lightning bolts, right?
Yeah.
Rocketed into the sky, and it was one of the largest debris. And what it did was it also took out an entire forest, which we'll get to. I'm sure you saw
Yeah.
about that. If
Yeah.
you ever Google it and just see these videos, I mean, it looks like a bomb went off, and we'll talk about the amount of force that this happened. But it just leveled all of these like trees, but it did more than just level them. It actually like picked them up and put them someplace else. Like it
Yeah.
moved an entire forest, which is crazy. So you're having that. You're having the obviously the magma and the gassy magma too, which is this is like superheated air, which is just
Yeah, no,
flying
ash,
through.
rock, volcanic
Yeah,
gas, steam. They said the
it was
blast
moving at
accelerated.
300 miles per hour.
Well, so at one point they were able to reach that. It reached a velocity of up to 670
Yeah,
miles per hour. And it covered 230 square miles area north of the volcano with just debris. I mean, it was just like a
yeah. And
blast
this
that
superheated
went out at
gas, yeah, it was
670 miles per hour.
yeah,
Nuts.
yeah. It was over 600 degrees Fahrenheit also. So this
Yep.
is like, I mean, it's just vaporizing everything that it touches. It's just obliterating everything that's there. And like 13 miles away from it, plastic bottles and stuff melted in the air, like
Yep.
melted. That's what they're talking about. And it was, they say that it was really just like, hell on earth. And Johnson actually saw this from Cold Water 2. He jumped on the radio and said, Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. And it pretty much engulfed him.
Yeah,
And
he
then there
died
was
right away.
he died instantly. And then there was Jerry Martin was an amateur radio operator who was also observing it from Cold Water, and his last words were, "It's going to get me too." Like they're watching this cloud. There's like this cloud coming down the mountain. They can't get away. They're just looking at it, and they're like, "That's it." Because once it gets, they said they probably died for something called heat shock, which is like the intense. So they said, luckily, more than likely, they felt no pain. It's just like a huge compression of like heat that basically just shuts you off, more or
Nuts.
less. And then
I
because it's
read.
over 600 degrees, you're just there's no
Oh yeah.
remains. It's just I turned to
Did
ash.
you did you see this? That it was estimated in certain areas that the blasts reached or actually surpassed supersonic speed in some
Yeah.
particular areas. Also, another thing that I found interesting is that the thunderous like blast was heard hundreds of miles away, right? but it wasn't really heard loudly in the immediate zone around Mount St. Helens because it was like the so-called quiet zone, which I thought was kind of interesting. But the blast tears off, like 1,300 feet of the volcano, of the top of the 1,300 feet, right?
Yeah, I mean, it
Uh,
shot over 80,000 feet into the sky.
yep. It leaves a whole new crater behind. It demolishes every tree within a 6 mile inner radius, right? Like just gone. Um, and it says it's estimated that 4 billion board feet of lumber was destroyed. I mean, this is like, that's what they're known for, is that lumber. I mean, this was economically, we're not even just talking about disaster itself, but the aftermath of that is just surreal. But then the ash cloud, I mean, that gets pretty crazy too.
Yeah, it blocked out the sun.
It does. Yeah. So after,
Yeah,
you're right.
they said it was 1.4 billion cubic yards worth of ash, and then it
Yep.
comes down and it's clogging, building. It's clogging like sewer drains. It's damaging buildings. Electronics across the state are all being affected, and it's also a lot of it is red hot volcanic gas and stuff like that. That's coming down the mountain, picking up all these like mud flows. It damages over 200 homes, destroys a bunch of bridges, clogs up the lakes and rivers. We'll talk about Spirit Lake, I'm sure later on. I'm sure you read
Yep.
about Spirit Lake. We'll look at
Yep.
that a
Yep.
little bit. And even though we talked about, and we'll get to a lot of the people who unfortunately lost their lives, some people actually managed to survive. I saw these story about a couple of these two fishermen that saw what was happening. They jumped into the river and just stayed under the water
Crazy.
as the cloud like flew overhead. And then there was a family of hikers that were actually shielded by another mountain was between them and the volcano. And they actually just like happened to like get there. And one reason why so many people did survive for the most part is because this was a popular tourist attraction, but they were forcing so many people to go away. Like they said, they're closing it. They closed down all the tourist attractions there because they weren't sure what was happening, and it could have
Yeah. They
been a
said it
lot
was over
more.
100 hikes in the area
Yeah,
up
like
the, yeah,
Johnson,
eastward.
the guy who died, who said Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. They said he's credited with saving probably thousands of people's lives by like getting all of that stuff shut down before it happened.
Crazy.
It could have
I
been
saw
much
that. Do you
greater.
see that the cloud, like the ash cloud, actually circled the globe? I thought that was insane.
Yeah,
It says that it, first of all, when huge ash cloud mushroomed right vertically into the sky, they said at least 12 miles up, and then it produced lightning, as you mentioned before, right, sparking numerous forest fires. But then it cloud traveled 60 miles per hour and basically turned the day into night in Washington.
yeah.
um
Block out the
and
sun.
then, right, and over the course of the next 2 weeks, this giant ash cloud literally sent like 200, they say about 520 million tons of ash eastward over 22,000 miles. So it basically circled the globe several times until the ash finally fell to the earth, which looked more or less like snow, which again, I thought that was insane. And same thing, like as you mentioned, this idea. Well, you want to get into the Spirit Lake? I mean,
Well, before that, I'd like to talk about like one of the people who I thought was interesting.
oh,
This
the
little
odd
story.
guy. Yeah,
Yeah, Harry R. Truman.
yeah.
And basically he was a World War I, World War II veteran, and he lived in that area. He was in charge of like not like kind of like a parks worker, right?
Hmm.
And he lived in a log cabin right over there. And they basically told him to leave, and he's like, "I'm not leaving." He used to live there with his wife. His wife died in 1978. He closed the lodge and rented out a handful of boats and cabins and stuff. He lived there over the summer, and he really just didn't care. They kept on. He became kind of a local celebrity or celebrity around the country. Really, he's always people would come in when things started looking weird or looking like something's going to happen, and he would give interviews and express his opinion that he says I don't think it's going to blow or not, and if I don't believe it's gonna, I'm not going to pack up. And he had little concern if it was going to go up. He says if the mountain goes, I'm going with it. He's like, there's a lot of timber here. The Spirit Lake is here. All that's going to protect me. I'm not worried about it. He actually put a bunch of provisions in like a old mining tunnel. He's like, if it goes up, I'm just going to run into the mining tunnel and hang out there for a couple weeks and stuff like that. They're like, no, it's that's not how it works. You know what I mean? So law enforcement kept on trying to evacuate him, and he's like, you can't pull me out with a mule team. That's what they basically said. He said the mountain's part of Truman, and Truman's part of the mountain. He became like famous for this. Basically, like they talked about, he became like a folk hero. A lot of children in the area wrote like songs and poems to him. A group of children from Oregon sent him banners saying "Harry, we love you." They wrote him fan letters, and he actually like started crying because they were so sweet. He actually took a helicopter ride to visit the kids and say thank you and stuff like that. So it was like crazy. And later on, those
Yeah.
same they sent him letters. He actually gave them letters in volcanic ash. And then actually, this is kind of sad. Later on, after the eruption, he obviously gets
He
killed in the
dies. Yeah.
eruption. Those same students sold the letter and the volcanic ash, and they used the money to buy flowers for his family after the
Wow.
eruption. These like group of
Wow.
fifth graders, but it was like this huge like thing, and he was like, there's still a
There's like a plaque for him,
there's
right?
a plaque for him there. There, he basically lives in that lodge with him, and he had 16 cats, and they were all just vaporized. And then, apparently, a lot of people were like, "Oh, do you think he survived? Do you think he survived?" And even his sister was like, if anyone would survive, it would have been Harry, but obviously he didn't. There was no way to figure out what
I
could have
never
happened.
got
But
that. Like, if there's a cataclysmic, nature, whatever happening, when people don't want to get out of their house, like whether it's a flood or earthquake or tornado, like, no, I'm not leaving. Like, I don't understand that.
I don't know, he was an
You know,
older man. Like he just was like, "That's it. This is my." This is a guy who
like this, all right.
saw
Oh
World
man,
War One.
I almost
You know what I
said
mean?
go out with a bang. I feel bad now,
Oh, that's
man.
rough, man. That's rough.
I know. I
But
didn't mean that.
yeah, no, he was just kind of like he said, if it goes up, I'm going up with it. And he really thought the lake and stuff would protect him. Like we said, and there was a lot of timber, but the explosion was so much that it moved that entire forest. And then Spirit Lake, I think that kind of goes in what you were talking about with Spirit Lake now, because it destroys that lake for a period of time.
Crazy.
Well, basically, what happens is this, they call it a tsunami or an avalanche of just everything, right? Logs and volcanic ash and everything else it's picking up all get taken and just dumped into this lake, right? And it
Yep.
creates this massive tsunami. It actually creates a giant wave over 800 feet high. It forces the water, a lot of this water out of the lake, and all the volcanic ash and everything else also destroys all wildlife in the lake. Everything's dead. And
Yep.
it also makes the water has no oxygen in it for a while, and it just
Yep.
destroys the entire thing. And you see pictures of this lake. It just looks like there's just thousands and thousands of trees all sprued into this lake. And it used to be actually like a very popular like fishing spot and everything. There are fish in it today. What happened was in the 90s, they started reintroducing fish to it. Local fishermen just did it on their own.
Yeah.
But within a couple of years, they started like frogs and stuff started coming back and some algae started coming back, which replenished the oxygen and stuff like that. You are not allowed to, I think you can boat on the lake with a special permit today, but you cannot fish in the lake
Hmm.
anymore, even though that was like the big thing. But it's kind of, and they actually had to make there was like kind of like the volcano kind of made like a dam, and they actually had to build a tunnel underneath, which cost millions of dollars, so it would drain. Otherwise, it was going to flood the nearby towns. They
Wow.
changed the entire, geographical landscape of that area.
I mean, yeah. I mean, they said besides the fact that you have hundreds of homes and cabins and like just buildings literally wiped out or damaged, right? But it also ripped apart 185 miles of roads, right?
It just
And
destroyed
15
everything.
miles of railways, and all of that is just kind of blown up, and then part of the debris now. Like that's what's sitting in that lake. It's sitting all over the place.
It's
But
still
as you
there.
said,
Yeah,
like yeah, and as you mentioned with the idea of just wildlife, besides like the water aspect and what lake wildlife, it is estimated that all birds and small mammals up to 700. I'm sorry, up to 7,000 deer, elk, bear, any big game animals you can think of were killed. I mean, it just wiped
they weren't
everything out.
getting out. Yeah, they just got obliterated. Yeah.
Which is, I think that's like it is really kind of cataclysmic. I mean, this is pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, and like I said, it was one that they kind of knew was coming, but they couldn't pinpoint exactly when. So they got most of the people out. The people that unfortunately did pass away were people who refused to leave, and then there were a couple hikers who refused to leave, and then a lot of photographers and scientists that just couldn't get out in time, which is sad
Crazy.
because they kind of knew what was going on, but they still just stuck around. Again, this give an idea, like when this volcano goes goes up, it's huge. Like the power is 20. It says it erupts with 24 megatons, which is there's a mass amount of energy. It's 1,600 times more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima. They said it's greater than all the bombs dropped in World War II, plus the atomic bombs.
Wow.
So you see how like this massive magnitude that what this was, and in fact, only 57 people died. And I'm not diminishing that those are 57 lives lost, but like it could have been much much worse. And the eruption lasted for hours. It wasn't just like a one time one eruption. This was like numerous eruptions that were taking place, and it lasted for more than 9 hours.
Wow.
So it's just 9 hours of like constant just eruption.
And I think we should kind of not avoid the fact that U.S. Geological Survey right, is very adamant today that Mount St. Helens will likely explode again during our lifetime. Like the agency predicts that there's going to be an explosion um, of the magnitude of potentially 1980, um, in our lifetime, which I think is crazy. I
Yeah, they
mean,
said it could happen. Yeah.
it's still considered. So the U.S. Geological Survey that is done every few years. It was just updated from the last one, which was 2005. They just updated it like 2 years ago. They look at potential threats of American volcanoes, and what that really kind of makes us a big difference is that a lot of communities have moved close to these volcanoes, which was not really the case 100 years ago. You know what I mean, or 50 years ago per se. So they actually rate Mount St. Helens as a very high threat to this day in 2021 because of the impact that a potential eruption could have. I mean, the volcano is just over like 50 miles from Portland, Oregon. It's less than 100 miles from Seattle. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the
Yeah,
day,
and the ash,
how
if it
close we
goes
are.
again, the ash is going to go all over the place. Like it's gonna affect those that area.
So Hawaii's number one of the 18 volcanoes that are considered a very high threat in the United States. Hawaii's number one. Then you have Mount St. Helens, which is in obviously Washington, and then Mount Rainier in Washington, and then you have a couple in Alaska. Actually, Alaska is forming a pretty big issue. There's like a fear over Alaska because mainly because of the amount of air traffic. They're saying that right now it's estimated, you know, basically air traffic over Alaska's volcanoes is about 60,000 each day. You know,
Yeah,
people
and we know
hovering.
that in the past in 2010 there was an eruption in where was it, in Iceland, right, of a
Yeah,
volcano, and I remember that was being on the news because it's grounded like over 100,000 flights, stranding millions of passengers because the planes couldn't fly through it because one they
they
couldn't see,
couldn't
but
see.
also all the ash is getting into the jet engines and forget about it. So
Yep.
that can happen again, and if that happens over Alaska, that's also going to just shut down air travel. Like that's
Yeah, I
it.
mean, engine
It's done.
erosion,
There's
clogged
not,
air filters,
you just can't
right?
do it.
Complete engine, yeah, failure. It's nuts. I just,
It
I was
just can't
surprised of
happen.
how many. I mean, most, like I said, most of the ones that are very high threat lists are. I mean, obviously they're all in the western, right? But it's Hawaii, Washington, Alaska, Oregon, California, Alaska, Washington, Hawaii. You know what I mean? Like they're all
Yeah.
West Coast. Nuts. It's kind of scary
Well,
how
then, but I think the
quickly.
one that's like, I guess, is scary, but it's probably not going to happen anytime soon because it would be kind of the end of everything. Is the super volcano that's underneath Yellow National Park?
Yep.
They have said
Yep.
if
Yellowstone.
that ever
Yep.
spews ash, like it's going to cover the entire United States. It's going to cover crops. It's going to shut down power plants. So
I think that's insane that like we live in a world where we think we could predict so much, but at the end of the day, like imagine like Yellowstone just erupts. I mean, what?
they say
I've
that's
been
it.
to
Like
Yellow.
if
Have you been to
Yellowstone erupts,
Yellowstone?
it's no.
Oh,
One day,
you.
I'll
Yeah.
definitely go one day. But
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to attack. I'm not going to try to take selfies with bison. Like you see all those people on TV. You
Yeah.
see it all
No.
the time. I've always get that always pops up. Like so and so gets injured. They try to take a selfie with like a bison or like a
Yeah. No.
grizzly bear, and like they're wondering what
No.
happens. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? Like, anyway, whatever.
Anyway.
Um, this is one of those things. Well, that even goes back to with Mount St. Helen today. You can go there today.
Yeah.
It's actually open,
The
year
monument.
round, late spring, early fall. You can go there. You can go up. You can go up to the outer ridge, and you actually are allowed to climb to the crater. You just can't go into the crater. That's strictly prohibited because like it's dangerous and
But you can
you
see
get stuck
pictures of
down there.
people like sitting around the
Yeah,
crater. It's
people
kind
still
of
do
cool.
it. People still do
Yeah.
it, but like they try to enforce that you don't go into the crater. But you can go to the outer rim of the crater. You can definitely go there. It's a very popular area just because of like the wilderness and also the history behind
And
it.
it's a national volcanic monument right now. Since
Yeah.
1982, Congress set aside like 110,000 acres, basically.
Yeah,
Also,
because they're
trees,
also
they say, and forest vegetation is growing. Mammals have resettled the area. As you mentioned before, Spirit Lake is kind of being reborn. So, more or less, like, I mean, it's coming back,
yeah. They said even
right?
the mountain itself healed part of itself when lava came out and cooled and actually like filled in some of those things. I mean, it looks very different. The peak of the mountain is no longer there.
Yeah, no.
So again, if you look at the pictures, you can see that they're actually fascinating pictures to look at, like the side by side.
Did you see that? However, like by 86, there was still like 17 additional blasts that took place there, and now like a new lava dome was formed in the
Yeah,
crater.
yeah. There was over 17. Yeah,
120.
they
Yeah.
call them episodes whenever like lava comes out, and it began filling. It built like a lava dome and reached 876 feet or something like that, like across. So that was big.
And then 2004, it was the when it restarted again, right? It was pretty inactive from 86 to
Well, they erupted
2004.
continuously. Again, when you say erupted, these aren't like massive eruptions, but it basically means like smoke and ash, all that stuff is coming
Yeah.
out. It did it continuously for 4 years. So if
Yeah.
you think about it, like that's, and then that's when the lava dome actually grew bigger and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
between 2004 and 2008, which they said it dumped enough lava into the crater floor to like fill out 36,000 Olympic swimming pools. Um, and then by 2013, two lava domes created from the continual lava flow had like filled about 7% of the original blast crater. So it's
it's
slowly
just filling
filling.
back. Yeah, it's healing itself basically.
Isn't it crazy how that works?
Well,
Sorry, that's
that's
crazy.
that's that's nature, I guess, right?
We
But
should
yeah, to
also
get back,
mention that like what really started this was an earthquake that kind of just like pushed it over the edge and made that bubble burst. But
yeah, and that's it.
in 1980, I'm sorry, I keep saying 19. I don't know why. In 2018, right, at least 40 earthquakes in just that area have occurred, and one registered 3.9 on the Richter scale. So like 40 earthquakes in just 3 years ago in that same area. That's a little scary if you think about it.
Yeah,
They
it's a
don't
high.
point to like an imminent eruption or anything, but like it
No,
does
they say right
indicate
now
that
it's pretty much would say it's considered within normal standards, I
yes,
guess.
still
But
active,
it's still active. Well, yeah, I mean they're
but
active volcanoes.
yeah.
Remember that movie? There was a movie years ago. I think it was called Volcano
Dante's
or
Peak?
something. But that was another one. But there's also the one that I think it was called Volcano. It's like Tommy Lee Jones, like a volcano erupted in like L.A. or something like
Okay.
that. I remember that movie just vaguely, and they stopped the lava flow by like putting like they got like those like highway dividers, those concrete
Okay.
dividers, and just like redirected the lava flow and like dumped a bunch of water on it, which actually is based on something that believe they did in Iceland a couple years earlier.
I literally just looked it up.
I don't know why I remember
1970.
that movie. Right? It's Tommy Lee Jones and like Anne Heche or
Yeah.
something like that, right?
Yeah.
How am I
It's like
remembering that right now? I
I
don't know.
don't know. It's like this obscure 1997 movie.
1997. Wow. Yeah, I remember seeing it. It was like, oh yeah, this is okay. They're fighting lava. That was like when remember they used to always come out all those disaster movies. It was like Twister and Volcano,
Yeah.
Dante's
Well,
Peak,
that was
like
like
all
a bit.
those.
Yeah.
It's like all
Yeah.
those big disaster movies, which they come and go. But this was a real life one, or the Mount St. Helens that
Huh.
just leveled. Think about that too all the time. I know I've said it before, but just that it was 16,000 times more power, 1,600 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. Like that's
That
crazy.
is nuts.
If you
That
think
is
about
nuts.
24 megatons of type of power, which was just like unleashed.
Nuts.
Imagine if that happens by a city. There's no more city. That's it.
Wow.
So
So do you have any fun facts before we let this one go?
we're kind of looking at a lot
I
of
feel like
them,
we
but
did a lot of them
kind
already,
of
right?
touching a lot. We're talking about all these different things. I know one that was interesting that I guess we didn't talk about is that it actually the snow and rock accumulating in the crater is actually the
Mhm.
youngest glacier now on Earth. So they actually
Really?
they're it's followed by scientists now because they're able to like, examine it and look and see like, all right, this is how glaciers are actually formed, and we can actually watch one being formed because it is the youngest glacier on Earth. So that's it's a little bit interesting there. If you're a glacier follower, you know,
All right.
something to follow,
Well,
cheer it
I
on.
didn't follow. Considering that Glacier National Park is losing all its glaciers, I was there a
That'd be a
couple of years
problem. Yeah,
ago, and I was and the national the park ranger was like, "Take pictures of this because these glaciers are disappearing." It's like, oh, crazy.
it was also the largest terrestrial landslide in recorded history.
Okay, okay.
Of all the stuff just flying down that mountain. Remember, so fast too. So,
Anyway, I think this was a fun little episode,
well,
right? I
yeah,
mean, again,
I don't
fun
want to
is
use
a
the word
relative.
fun there, Pete, but probably
It's
like
I
interesting,
know
maybe thought
relative
provoking.
term.
Um, fun, yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
maybe
I
not.
guess
Maybe
because we're
not.
talking about it, all this time, after it
I
took
can't believe
place.
how recent this was. Like, I just
It really was. It was before our time, but not that much before us.
yeah.
Obviously, not obviously. But as kids, I remember kind of hearing about it
I'm
and
sure a
like
lot
getting
of
rid of
our
ourselves about
listeners,
it.
the people that are listening to this right now, you guys might have been alive when this happened. Maybe this was one of those like, where were you when this happened? I mean, definitely, if you are from Washington State, this would have been something
That's a
that,
big deal. You're from that, yeah,
yeah,
definitely because you can. It's just one of those events I mean, it is a major event. It's the most destructive volcanic eruption in U.S. history.
Cray, cray. Anyway, well, thank you everyone for tuning in once more. We really truly appreciate it. If you need to find us, please look for us online at historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. You could also find us on various social media outlets. And please do not be afraid to click that subscribe button. It helps. Not monetarily, because we don't have any money for that. We don't get any money
Yes,
for
we
this
don't
whatsoever.
collect any money for this. It's not why we do it.
However, it does help. So with that, I hope you guys have a nice week, and I'll see you guys next week. Enjoy.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.